Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. I got to work on my introduction. Welcome home. I should start saying that like WNST. We're Baltimore positive. We're 26 years into this. On Thursday, I will be giving these Maryland Lottery Ravens scratch offs, the $2 variety. You can win 20 grand on Thursday up at Greenmount Station. We'll be in Hampstead. Come on by. Been a lucky batch of lottery tickets. Our friends at Jiffy Lube Multicare also powering us up, powering Luke back and forth to Pittsburgh with Yins and Not, powering up on Royal Farms coffee. And we're going to get to Justin Tucker in this. I just want to promote the Crab Cake Tour. Let everybody know we're going to be out in December. Lots of places. We're going to Coco's. We're going to be at the BMA at Gertrude's with my cousin John Shields and my friend Dan Rodrigues. We're also going to be in Amici's. I just want to say Amici's in December. They don't have a crab cake yet, but I think they're going to import Nancy Longo over from Pierpoint and try to have her make us crab cake, and her crab cakes are delicious. So I'm trying to celebrate the holidays while A, we still have democracy, B, we still have a chance to win a Super Bowl. I don't know if they're going to win the World Series or not. I'm making all that up. Luke, I know they did move the fences back in. They're out, they're in. They're out, they're in. It's kind of like the Ravens have been out in Pittsburgh a whole lot here, 8 out of the last 9. Luke is a little punch drunk, in the back end of this, driving up, driving back, doing it all alone while I watch on the internet. And the Tucker thing is, I don't know how long you expect the guy to make 60-yard field goals when he's in his mid-30s. I mean, I know he's the GOAT and he sells chicken and everybody loves him and like he sings and like all of that, but we've talked about this one too many Mondays for it not to be an issue, Luke, right? I mean, it just is what it is at this point.
Yeah, I mean, we said this last week. It's a thing. How big of a thing? It's becoming a bigger thing, and that's the problem, and that's what's concerning. And even you just made the point of considering Justin Tucker the GOAT. The caveat was always the challenge, not just for him, for anyone. That's why Adam Vinatieri is remembered the way that he is. It's to do it for a really, really long period of time, and how difficult that is in any sport, right? I mean, longevity is a big part of what makes someone a Hall of Famer, unless you just happen to have the Terrell Davis kind of contract or career where the peak is just so impressive and you have enough support from enough voters or enough people that are in the room, depending on the voting for process for any given sport, that you get in. But this is a problem. This is concerning at this point in time. I think one of the last frontiers, and I noted this in my 12 Ravens thoughts going into Sunday's game in Pittsburgh, is just how well Justin Tucker has performed at the place formerly known as Heinz Field. He had not missed a field goal in that building. And keep in mind, we're talking about someone who is in year, 13 of his career? Year 12 of his career? 13. Uh, he hadn't missed a kick in Pittsburgh since his rookie year, Nestor. He had missed one field goal in his entire career in Pittsburgh as a rookie. He'd been perfect since then, regular season, and he was, I think, 3 for 3 in that playoff game in the 2014 postseason. So you're talking about someone fully acknowledging the challenges of kicking in that place, and even how Steelers kickers have over the years gone sideways trying to kick there, especially with that open-ended, that open end zone. And that's something that never impacted him. That's something that never seemed to phase him. He's always been nails in Pittsburgh. So for him to go out there and miss 2 kicks on Sunday in a game that ended up being a 2-point loss, I've been asked this question a lot. It was even amongst us, some of us reporters, just asking amongst ourselves as we're heading down to the post-game locker room, where you start to ask the question: are the Ravens at a point now where you at least consider bringing in some other kickers, just a look, right? And that doesn't mean you're cutting Justin Tucker. Let's be clear. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we're all that close to that dramatic.
Remember when Billick brought in and Zauner brought in the guy that just kicked off from the 49ers, and Stover was still doing the field goals? Remember that?
Yeah. I mean, there have been times with that. I mean, the Ravens had some kicking competitions, even when, what was it? Is it Shane Graham and Graham Gano or whatever?
Yeah, there's a lot of Grahams. There's Graham Crackers.
Yeah, they've done some different things like that over the years,
Stark ice cream. I'm sorry.
but right. But I think it's a fair question at this point in time to start saying, are we getting close to the point where you need to at least bring in a couple kickers if you think, and look, so much of this is psychology, so much of this is the mental side of this. Tucker was asked about his confidence after the game. He said his confidence isn't waning. Of course he's going to say that. No one is going to say my confidence is shot, right? You're never going to hear an athlete say that, but it's hard not to look at this now through the lens of how much of this, whatever the potential physical or mechanical issue might have been. We've talked about it at a couple points, wondering, is there some kind of physical, minor injury, something like that that's impacting him? We've all speculated because this is uncharted territory. I mean, this guy has been so unbelievable for so long, and
By the way,
and
the
all of
internet
that.
thinks it's
But
the holder. Just so you know, the internet thinks that.
it's fair to ask that, right? I mean, that question was posed to Chris Horton this past week, but that's again, that speaks to how great the operation, how great Justin Tucker has been for 12 years, right? I mean, we're talking about someone who came in at a time when kickers were, from a perception standpoint, with Ravens fans, were at an all-time low with what had happened with Billy Cundiff in New England, and this kid at what 22 years old, I think he was at the time,
Couldn't
comes in
miss.
and just outkicks Billy Cundiff, wins the job, and I mean, kicked them into the AFC Championship game when you remember the kick he made in Denver in overtime. So it's just there's such an affinity, and I think it would be hasty to say he's done, he can't get back on track, anything like that. But I would say this much. Even if you're not at the point yet where you're ready to bring in a kicker to take a look see, you got to be updating the Rolodex on kickers right now because this is not getting better. It's getting worse. We talked about this with the missed extra point last week. Misses a 47-yarder on Sunday, misses a 50-yarder. Did make his longer kick. That was good to see that at the very least. But it's just not inspiring much confidence. I mean, you're at a point now where even on an extra point, I don't want to say you're holding your breath on every single kick, but you're kind of holding your breath on every single kick, right? I mean, it's not inspiring much confidence right now. And when you're talking about a team, and this goes back to our previous segment, the offense, Sunday aside, has played at such an elite level. It was an off day for the offense, obviously, on Sunday. The defense played as well as it did, but the defense has had its issues. They've had penalties, issues all over the place, every phase of the game. Now you add unreliable kicker or kicker who's searching for it. No, that's probably the kindest way to describe it right now. Justin Tucker's searching for it right now. That's I mean, when we're talking about all of the factors that you want to have going for you in terms of a championship resume, in terms of making a deep January run, especially the way it's looking now, that chances are they're going to be on the road and be on the road a lot. You don't want to have kicker issues. I mean, you just don't. It's that simple. And the juxtaposition of where Justin Tucker is right now with what Chris Boswell did for the Steelers, who were bad offensively overall, right? I mean, they had short fields and they could not put the ball in the end zone, and they were 0 for 4 inside the red zone. Chris Boswell did what great kickers do, which is make up for some of the other deficiencies. What Justin Tucker did for years and years, especially on the back half of the Joe Flacco era, where their offenses had issues. We know that. So it's unsettling. It's concerning. I think it's one of those that, it tugs on the heartstrings a little bit because you don't want this to get to a place where, dare I say, you're talking about parting ways with Justin Tucker. And again, that's not this week. I don't think that's next week. But the way it's looking and knowing how much money he makes and everything, hey, the rest of the season's big for him, right? I mean, you can't just give him a free pass week after week after week without trying to see what else is, what your other options potentially could be. So again, I don't know if we're at that point,
Well, I don't want to
but
be mean to Justin Tucker, but he's one of the reasons they lost on Sunday. When you lose a
he
2 point
is, of
game and
course.
you miss two field goals, I mean,
Yeah,
it's not like he's the GOAT in that way because there were goats at other places, around the field.
he's one of the goats. Yeah.
He's one of the goats. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can't dispute that, right? And he'd be the first to tell you that. And I even, I asked John Harbaugh after the game. I tried to word the question in a way that wasn't going to allow Harbaugh to just lean on Justin Tucker as a track record. Justin Tucker has a track record. We all know that. Justin Tucker's been phenomenal. I even acknowledged he had been so good in that venue, hadn't missed a kick in Pittsburgh since 2012. And John flat out said, Tuck's got to make kicks. He knows that. We all know it. And again, are we at the point now where you're at least making contingency plans behind the scenes in terms of not cutting him, not releasing him, nothing drastic to that magnitude, but you've got to at least have in your mind if this continues to go sideways, you can't just let the kicking game take down the ship, right? I mean, I don't know who that kicker would be because Nestor, I haven't studied kickers that might be out there right now because we
I
haven't
don't know
had
that
this
this
conversation.
organization has looked at a kicker. I don't know that Randy Brown has been scouting the
Right.
next stud at Temple or at Penn, you know?
I mean, they've brought in, they brought in kickers. I mean, remember it was Corey Vedvik who they ended up getting a fifth round pick for in trading. I mean, Will
That
Lutz
was the
has,
guy that got the jump down in the
yeah,
Fells Point. Yeah.
Will Lutz has made a really impressive career out of someone who was just the third kicker in training camp and went on to New Orleans and has been other places since then. So it's not as though they don't have an aptitude for that, but it's like I said, at the very least, you're needing to update the Rolodex. You need to at least look at this and say, all right, we're not doing it yet, but kickers A, B, and C are out there right now. We like this kid coming out of the draft. Oh, 3 years ago. I'm just putting this kid kicked in the UFL or the XFL, and we've seen that. I mean, look at what Detroit uncovered as far as for their kicking game. So again, I'm not saying we're there yet, but just the fact that we're even asking that question, Nestor, it speaks to this being very unsettling. Because again, when you're talking about all the factors that go into a football game and understanding the history and the makeup of this football team under John Harbaugh, special teams have been so important to that. And this is just not a very good special teams group right now. I mean, Jordan Stout has been the biggest bright spot, I'd say. He hasn't been perfect, but he boomed a couple kicks. Did have one that went in the end zone, was disappointing, but he's kind of been the bright spot. Their return teams have committed too many penalties. Tucker's situation speaks for itself right now. These are the types of things. Again, when you're projecting this out and thinking about January, special teams are an area that can win you ball games. I mean, the Ravens know that as well as anyone, right? I mean, when you consider their history, not just with Tucker or Matt Stover, but Jacoby Jones, Jermaine Lewis. I mean, guys that won them football games and helped them win football games in January in that phase of the game. And they're just not getting nearly enough from that group overall.
You
Tucker's
didn't
the
mention Ed
headline.
Reed, even though Billick never wanted
Oh,
to
yeah.
send him out there.
Oh, I mean, the
He's the
greatest
greatest ever.
greatest punt blocker in NFL history. I mean, unbelievable, right? I mean, that's something that for all the young kids out there, you may not remember that because Ed only did that his first couple years, but oh my gosh, he was unbelievable at
Uncle Ed
blocking
only does
punts.
medical and whiskey commercials these days,
Yeah,
but
yeah. So, but special teams, we've spent a lot of time focused on the defense, and the reason, and for good reason, the defense weighs more, is more valuable, carries more clout in terms of what it takes to win a football game. We always talk about the three phases of football, but offense and defense are much more important, and special teams is 1/7 of the pie or something like that. I've even seen some analytic types kind of view it through that lens where you kind of say offense is the most important, defense is right behind it, and special teams is a distant third. But that doesn't mean it's meaningless either. And I mean, again, John Harbaugh, his background, Jerry Rosburg, the tradition that he built. Chris Horton's. I'm not saying his job's on the
working
line
on it.
here,
Working on it. Yeah.
but they've got to get better, right? I mean, they've got to get better. It's not just Justin Tucker, although that's certainly the big headline. So again, you talk about a game like this where it's 18-16 and it's low scoring. And by the way, I'd be remiss. I don't think I mentioned this in our previous conversation. If I did, I apologize. To your point, I'm a little loopy and tired from a lot of driving on Sunday, but first time in Ravens Steelers history that the winning team did not score a touchdown. I could not believe that, by the way, Nestor. I would have guessed that happened at least once or twice over the years. But first time in the history of the rivalry that the winning team did not score a touchdown. And when you're talking about a game like that, the margins matter, right? The little things matter in a game like that. And whether we're talking about Justin Tucker or some of the penalties on special teams that have been an issue. We've talked about the penalties on offense and defense. It's been an issue on special teams as well. These are the things that add up to losing by 2 points, right? I mean, some of the issues are more obvious than others and more evident than others, but when you're talking about field position and how important field position is in a game like Sunday's, how many times did the Ravens end up finding themselves backed up? It's not like they sprung any 60-yard returns that got called back, but there were a couple occasions where, they'd be on the 30 or somewhere like that, and suddenly you're back at the 20 or you're back at the 15. I mean, that matters, especially on a day when your offense isn't clicking and firing on all cylinders the way that it can at its best. So again, Tucker is the headline, and I'm trying not to make too much of it, but this is not something that you can just continue to brush off every week. I mean, when you look at kickers, and Boswell is a great example of this. I mean, how about the fact that Butker in Kansas City, he's on IR right now. I mean, that's a big deal for Kansas City. He's going to be back, the way it sounds, but kicking matters, and the kicking game has been better than ever in terms of distance and what kind of weapon that can be. And on a day where the Ravens were not great offensively by any stretch of the imagination, they needed their kicker to come through, and he failed on two different occasions. And you do the math. They lost by two, and they missed two very makeable field goals. Meanwhile, the other team's kicker made all six of his. So, it's never just one thing. And to your point, Justin Tucker wasn't the only GOAT, and we don't mean the greatest of all time. We mean the traditional connotation,
the kind of
sports
GOAT my
connotation.
dad and your dad
Exactly.
knew about, right?
Exactly. He wasn't the only one, but he certainly was one of the big ones on Sunday. And Tucker be the first to tell you that, but he's got to figure this out. And like I said, if he doesn't, the Ravens, they've got to have the Rolodex updated at the very least to see if this thing doesn't get better and continues to go in the wrong direction. I don't know how much longer you can go without at least taking a look at some other kickers here to see what you have, even though I don't think the next Justin Tucker is just out there waiting to be signed. I'm not at all suggesting that, but if this continues to spiral, and it feels like it's spiraling a little bit, it feels like it's snowballing a little bit in the way you don't want it to. Again, you've got to at least be willing to work out a kicker. Maybe that sends the message. Maybe that I don't know. Again, I don't know what's going to make Justin Tucker tick in this way because we haven't been in this territory with someone like him, but it's very unnerving considering some of the other issues we've talked about on this football team to now be talking about your multi-time pro football or Pro Bowl future Hall of Fame kicker being a problem and being something that you can't trust right now.
Luke Jones is here. We are going to be doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour on Thursday at Greenmount Station, and then take a little week off next week for the holiday. Plenty of turkey and stuffing and football and the Chargers and all that. We're doing a huge music week here. So if at any point later in the week you put on AM 1570 or you're out at our website, all of I think it's 194 total music pieces that are up at Baltimore Positive, but 72 Hall of Famers, rock and roll Hall of Famers, including 21 that I just found and unearthed in the modern era. All that stuff is going to be coming your way. You'll be hearing it, seeing it, clicking on it, seeing it out on our social media. You can follow Luke at Baltimore Luke. By the way, I am now on Blue Sky. You can find me out there at my name. I have not put a Baltimore Positive page up yet, but I intend to do that very soon as well. Luke, I want to do a whole segment later, probably, today on coaching. And you mentioned Horton, and we've talked about Zach Orr, and we've talked about him losing coaches and the value of coaches and where all of that is, and even thinking Monken is better than Greg Roman. And we'll have the chance to look at that, over the next week as we'll see Greg Roman next week. Special teams globally, something that the one time John Harbaugh really got pissed off at me, we were having breakfast together at 5 in the morning out at the castle. The sun wasn't even up, and we're sitting there eating Cheerios down in the thing, down in the cafeteria. I mentioned him being a special teams coach. He burred up at me, and I thought he was going to slap me. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he hates all of that. And this was a number of years ago, but it was after he won a Super Bowl. So, um, I still think of him as that's his specialty. And I see the dude chewing the gum on the sideline with the Steelers. I've been watching him all year. That guy's a treat. And I almost reached to Mike Westhoff last week and didn't realize he's the Broncos special teams coach. He's got to be 94 years old. He was the Baltimore Colts special teams coach. So special teams is one of these things that, like, once you're really good at it, you're good for life. Dave Tobe is still doing stuff, and they pulled off some fake thing last week, and I'm like, that's Dave Tobe, you know? And John Harbaugh worked with Dave Tobe, so they know each other well. Um, Special teams and what the league, what health and science has legislated out of the game in regard to returns and in regard to onside kicks. And, at one point there was a kick away when you thought 3 timeouts. Maybe they'll onside kick. Not a high percentage play. John said that. No one knows more about special teams than John. If that's an insult to him, then wear it, John. But I think of John as being a guy who's spent large segments of his life up late at night thinking about a wedge. And I don't mean, salad or a lemon wedge that Jack Krabby's going to give me next time I'm down at the CFG Bank Arena. Um, or Billick's wedge in the Coors Light commercial, right? But a lot of special teams has been legislated out, right? So a lot of the um, 30 years of studying the game, it's all gone. Like they've taken so much of that out. I don't know who to blame, or I haven't been around. I've never met Chris Wharton in my life. I'm not allowed to ask questions. I wonder why. Maybe it's the length of my hair. I'm not sure why you get to ask the questions, but the special teams game from the outside feels to me to be greatly diminished until you miss a kick, or until the punt's not good, or until you have penalties on whatever plays are out there, even though they don't feel as high impact. Even though you give them the ball on the 30-yard line right now, that's like a really bad return. Every time you give them the ball on the 30-yard line, in the old days, you'd say that's really crappy coverage. Harbaugh get fired for that. Allowing a team to start at the 30-yard line every day. So the game's changed, right? I mean, and we don't, certainly in the middle of the season, we don't talk about it. You certainly are not going to get Harbaugh to talk about it unless you're going down to the owners' meetings where he sits there at his thing that they've now condensed to everything, where there used to be an hour where he would sit and opine about special teams for a whole hour if he wished to, and they were looking to change the rules, and he was looking to be a hard-ass traditionalist, bringing back the ghost of Bo Schembechler and all the stuff that he liked to do. But John hasn't won the special teams battle as a coach the last 2 decades. That battle's been won by science and by Roger Goodell's office and by the legal department and neck injuries. And I saw DeMar Hamlin celebrating, after they shut down Mahomes, and he's back out on the field. Special teams and coaching, and we'll do coaching, but just special teams and what the game has become. And then we sit here and we lose in Pittsburgh and say, our special teams weren't good enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like special teams been eliminated. I mean, the kick return is obviously the drastic change here. I think everyone's trying to search that. I mean, going back to your point about John Harbaugh, I mean, it's an area of expertise for him. That doesn't mean that's his only expertise. I mean, he's been a head football coach now for 17 years. So he has more expertise as a head coach
I
than
hear
he
Earl
had.
Weaver right now on my shoulder in that John Miller book saying, I'm going to the Hall of Effing Fame.
Yeah,
So yeah, I
but
mean,
but at
yeah,
the same
right.
time, well, it's just, and I'll use this on a much smaller scale, much less significant scale. I've now been in sports media way longer than I was a fifth grade teacher, but I'm not going to be offended if someone says, "Hey, you were a teacher once. What do you think about this?" Right? So yeah, I mean, but putting that aside, putting that part of it aside,
Dude, I
it's
love when I
just
do teacher stuff with you. When you and I are on the road and you
it's
start yelling about being a teacher, we should do segments on that because you were an
nah.
expert on that too. So,
I'm no longer, and I've been out of it too long at this point. And maybe that's John Harbaugh might say the same thing from the standpoint of how different special teams are now compared to. But that said, don't let
and you
John
know
Harbaugh.
what? If he were man enough to get in front of me, I'd ask him. I would
Right.
ask him
But
that.
but I would say don't let it Don't
He
let
doesn't want
John
to see
Harbaugh
me. Believe me, he doesn't want to run into me.
don't let any of that fool you. I mean, he still obviously takes a strong interest in what's going on with their special teams. And look, even before Sunday, even before Justin Tucker's two misses or more penalties on Sunday, they were 19th in special teams DVOA. I mean, that's very unremarkable. Punting, Jordan Stout's had a good year. The metrics look good there overall. Not perfect. He's had his moments where he'd like to have a kickback here or there. But that's kind of been the bright spot. But the return game has been unremarkable. It's not as though their kick coverage has been poor. I don't want to say it's been bad across the board. It hasn't been, but it just really hasn't been much of a difference maker for them. Like I said, punting, Stout's been good. He's been I'd say he's taken a nice step forward. Again, I'm just looking at DVOA. That's one metric. Going into this week, he was kind of ninth in punting points as Aaron Schatz and his team collects the data for DVOA. So
Aaron Schatz
it,
is my guest on the show later today.
there you go. So it hasn't been all bad, but that is another area like Justin Tucker where you're thinking the Ravens, no matter what their offense is in a given year, or in this case, what their defense is in a given year, they could always count on their special teams helping them in the margins. It wasn't going to, special teams don't turn a bad team into a good team or a great team into a mediocre team, but it can still, it makes a difference, right? It matters on the margins, right? It can turn a really good team into a great team, or it can cost a great team a football game at a critical juncture, right? Or, a team that's less talented, but they're really sound on special teams. It can help you win those one score games that tend to be 50-50 over the long run, right? So, but you just look at special teams for this team right now, and it's not very special. It's not something that's really helping them win football games right now, and that's very strange territory when you talk about Justin Tucker, not just him, but Matt Stover for over a decade, right? Matt Stover for 13 years. Even late in his career when he wasn't the same long distance kicker, he was still accurate, in terms of what his range was. You could count on him. So,
Well, Kyle Richardson could have been an MVP of Super Bowl 35 for pinning the Giants back every punt. You talk about how long this thing went on with Sam Cook and what
yeah,
kind of player he was and what kind of person and the Wolf Pack and the holds and the operation was always automatic around here and
it's not right now.
it's not right now.
Yeah, I mean, it just isn't. So that's again, is special teams number one on my list of concerns? No. I mean, even Justin Tucker, as much as it's a concern, it I still have more concerns about the defense, the pass defense long term. Sunday's performance encouraging, but let's see what that looks like for the next 3 or 4 games. Let's see if they have really made some hay here with some of the personnel changes they've made. But yeah, and again, Tucker's the headline here. Let's be clear. I mean, even talking about the kick return game, with the new dynamic, I use dynamic and using air quotes because we know it hasn't been very dynamic. But that as far as the weight of what that is, it's not the end all be all in these football games. But when you have a kicker who's struggling, and when you have an offense, for example, on Sunday that was struggling and you had a couple situations where you end up being pushed back a little bit because of a couple penalties, those are things that hurt you. Starting field position is incredibly important. That's why this, with this kickoff and, all the rules about the landing zone or a touchback is now at the 30 as opposed to the 25 compared to when everything was at the 20 across the board. It's changed the math in terms of the starting field position and what that means in terms of points scored and all of that. So, it's not like it's all critically important, but it still matters. And it's something they need to get better with, beginning with Justin Tucker looking like Justin Tucker again. So, I don't want to give too much oxygen to that compared to the other factors that worked against them and the other things they didn't do well on Sunday. But yeah, it's a part of it. Again, do the simple math. Justin Tucker makes one of those. We're having a very different conversation right now, Nestor. We're talking about the Ravens having an ugly win, but a character building win, nonetheless. And that didn't happen. And instead, you're talking about a 7-4 football team that's now a game and a half back, and Pittsburgh has a game in hand in terms of the head-to-head. So this is one of those games that, regardless of what happens in January, but just looking at the end of the regular season, this is going to be another one of those games where you just say, man, as bad as the offense was, they should have won this football game. And hey, self-inflicted mistakes and penalties and turnovers and missed field goals. I mean, it's going to add up in a game like that. Surprise, surprise. AFC North, Ravens Steelers history. The little things matter a whole lot. And the Ravens just did not do a good job with the little things whatsoever on Sunday.
Get an extra day of cooking here this week. It's a Harbaugh 3 or 4, right? They only played twice before, right?
They played in 11, that Thanksgiving night game where the
right?
Ravens sacked Alex Smith 10 times, 9 times, whatever it
And then
was.
the Super Bowl.
And then the Super Bowl.
Yeah. They never
because
played out there, right? They only played the game here, right?
They played out there. The next time they played out there was 2015, and what that was that Tom Sula at that point in time. Harbaugh was gone after 14. He went to Michigan. So
the other
yeah,
Harbaugh
too. It's funny, and we'll get to this, and I don't want to, again, there's so much meat on the bone talking about this Pittsburgh game, but I don't know about you, and it has nothing to do with John or Jim or anything like that. This storyline doesn't do anything for me now. We did this a decade ago. Like,
they played in the Super Bowl.
What? Right,
like,
exactly.
There's no Monday night game that's going to top that.
I mean,
I think it's checking in on the story as to where.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly Jim's relationship with the NCAA and the steaming bag of flaming manure that he left up in Ann Arbor.
Oh, and he won a national championship. I mean, that happened, right? I mean, regardless of any NCAA stuff, that happened. Like, even if years from now they vacated or whatever, it happened. Like, we saw it with our own eyes. So there's that, and the fact that he's back now, and certainly you can get into, well, they're both in the AFC. They could see each other in January, depending on how the chips fall there. I mean, I understand it, right? But just that was such
it's a much more interesting football game than it is a Harbaugh versus Harbaugh.
Right. I think
it's a good football game Monday night.
And just the fact that they're, I mean, the Chargers are Ravens West. I mean, J.K. Dobbins sealed the game with the touchdown on Sunday night against the Bengals. Gus Edwards is back. Greg Roman. I mean,
there's plenty of storylines for Scott Van Pelt broadcasting down on the field at SoFi Stadium next week.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, Joe Ortiz isn't going to get any attention in terms of the storyline for the actual game itself. I mean, Joe Ortiz, I mean, he was a lifer with the Ravens, right? I mean, he was here
instrumental
forever.
in drafting so many of the players. Had I written a Purple Rain 3 and Eric DeCosta and I got coffee together, I'd probably learn about which guys Joe liked the best. But Joe might have been a Matabike guy, or probably was a Marlon Humphrey guy, or right?
Yeah, I mean, you just look at it through that lens. I mean, there's a lot of interest in this game for me that goes beyond just the John versus Jim thing that the national media is going to eat up, and I get it. I mean, I understand that, right? It's fine. I guess just that part of it for me, it's like that Thanksgiving game in 11. That was a massive story. And then the following year, there was an entire week of it in New Orleans for the Super Bowl. I mean, it doesn't get any bigger than that. So it's fine. You know what? The league's going to like it.
There are whole chapters in Purple Rain, too. You can read about the Harbaugh family and how John got his gig and Jim got his gig. And the part that's unwritten is Jim going off to Michigan and winning a championship and now coming back and saying, the one thing I haven't done is won a Super Bowl in L.A. with the Chargers. Nobody cares about the Chargers. And they're in a position to be disruptive, if nothing else, right? So certainly to the Ravens season this week, to the other side of Joni's sibling rivalry. Big week around here for music. It's International Music Day on Friday. We have the extra day and a half. Luke and I don't want to do the Harbaugh thing. I may find some Jim Harbaugh stuff to throw up along with all the really cool rock and roll stuff and the music. It's not just rock and roll. There's Engelbert Humperdinck. There's all sorts of stuff you're going to hear. It's Harry Connick Jr. that I've interviewed. So I've interviewed all of these people. Many of them I have not ever put out publicly. Some of that will happen later this week. Earlier this week, you're going to hear a whole bunch of stuff on Wednesday and Thursday going into the weekend. And Luke and I'll be here talking football. You'll find us at Baltimore Positive. Luke's at Baltimore Luke, and we're out on Blue Sky as well. The Maryland Crab Cake Tour comes to Greenmount Station on Thursday. We'll be in Hempstead. I have a whole litany of dates for next month. We're going to be at Coco's on the 4th. We're going to be at Gertrude's on the 5th at the BMA with Dan Rodricks. We're going to be at Amici's the following week. We're going to be at State Fair. We're going to be at Fadley's the second week of December, and then we're going to be doing Christmas week at Costas as well. And our friends at Cooper's North, who just had huge shows with the samples over the weekend. Good job up there for Patrick and everybody there. So all of our sponsors are buckled in. We're going to have a change of leadership in the country. We got football games going on. We have a baseball off season and free agency. They're moving the fence out. They're moving it in. They're moving it out. They're moving it in. I'm Nestor. He's Luke. We got plenty of football. We're WNST AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive.